you, I was caught up on one of the most amazing phone calls I've been on in ages. And I am sorry I'm a little bit late, but here I am. And I'm live, and that's awesome. So it's great to see y'all. I'm gonna just get on my phone here real quick and be like, hey, I'm live. Other people should join me because it's awesome. And yeah, it's awesome. It's Friday! Woo! Oh no, I'm echoing. Other people should join me. Thank goodness I noticed that this is echoing. I will tell you why my microphone was echoing so bad. And it is because my teenager decided to take my microphone out of my office and use it for her own purposes. And I can tell you how much I loved her getting into my office and using my things. I did not like that. And so I told her so. And that's why it was all echoey, because she's been using my stuff. So anyway, I sure am happy to be here with y'all today. I am really happy that it's Friday. I have been doing a lot of magical things. Hey, look, I am live. I have been trying to get through, share my timeline. There we go. Oh, technology. Okay, I'm going to focus now because clearly I'm not focused. Okay, so we are going to talk today about, this is the second in my 4-part installment about how I overcame, or not overcame because I still have imposter syndrome, how I have dealt with and addressed imposter syndrome. So welcome to today. So last time I talked, so I think it was last week, I talked about how the first time I actually spoke in a public setting, I was about how my anxiety about it was so bad that I like had to throw up, and it was really, did not like speaking in front of people. So I fast forward, so I make it through that career at Equality, Utah, and I get hired as the Vice President of Public Policy for Planned Parenthood of Utah and the Executive Director of Planned Parenthood Action Council. Now, this was back in 2006. And so I was like, I get hired. So what happened was Carrie Galloway, the CEO of Planned Parenthood of Utah, called me, and she said, I understand I'd be a fool not to hire you. And I thought it was a joke. And so I hung up on her because my imposter syndrome was so good, I didn't even believe I could be qualified to work for Planned Parenthood. And so then she called me back and said, no, really, I'd like to interview you for this job. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So we met for coffee. And about an hour later, she basically gave me the job of Vice President of Public Policy for Planned Parenthood of Utah. And I was elated. Like, I still had to meet with the board, but she said that they wanted to hire me. I was over the moon, you guys. I was like, oh, this is my dream job. I've never wanted anything so bad in my life. I'm going to be making the money I deserve to be making with my master's degree. I was so excited, y'all. I was like over the moon tickled. And then I had this voice creeping in. And this voice was like, you can't do that. You're going to work for Planned Parenthood. There's going to be all this controversy. You're going to be, you know, just steeped in drama. No one at the legislature will listen to you. You've created all these relationships with people because of your emancipation of a minor bill. And now nobody's going to want to talk with you because you're talking about Planned Parenthood stuff like abortion and contraception. But I was so excited about this job. And I knew in my heart and my soul that I could do that job because it was my dream job. It was a job that I had always wanted to do. I'd always wanted to work for Planned Parenthood. I had applied right after I got my bachelor's degree to work for Planned Parenthood, and they didn't hire me. So then I ended up getting this job. And I had already gotten through the, okay, I'm going to have to speak in public thing. So that was like, okay, I'm just going to throw up before I speak in public, I guess. Although I never really did ever again. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I had to start being on television. I had to start testifying at the legislature all the time. I had to manage a staff. I'd never managed a staff in my entire life. I had managed volunteers, but I had never managed a paid staff. And I was like, I cannot believe you are trusting me to do all of these things. I don't know what you're thinking. And at the time I was, oh my God, I was like 30, maybe 30, 31. And I was like, I just don't know about this in my head. But in my heart, I was so excited and I was so elated. And I was like, this is going to be amazing. And you're going to change the world. And it's going to be awesome. And the whole world is your oyster. And you can do anything you want to do. And in my head was like, no, people are going to hate us. You're not the right look. I mean, my God, you're a lesbian, for Christ's sake. You're married to a woman. What's going to happen? On and on and on. And so I had to really, every day, I had to focus on really having a conversation with my imposter syndrome and being like, listen, you're not helpful. And I had to really sort of figure out how to step into my power about this. So there were a couple of different ways that I would do that. One of the ways that I would do that is, and I have actually blogged about this on the blog, in a blog called What I Wore. And I will put a link to that in the comments. But I would put on my armor every day. So I would wear clothes that made me feel confident, that made me feel sexy, that made me feel pretty, and that made me really feel like I was going to be able to go and do the job that is expected of me, even if I don't feel confident in my head that I'm going to do it. I'm going to look the part so that I can play the part. And what ended up happening over the course of my career at Planned Parenthood was I really started to step into who I was and my power. So I would wear really beautiful, expensive boots with fishnet tights and my skirts. And so sometimes the legislature would know I was wearing fishnets, and sometimes they wouldn't because they'd be hidden, but I would know. And so I'd be like, I'm getting one over on you. I would wear low-cut shirts. Like if I had an especially daunting bill coming up, I would wear low-cut shirts. And everyone would know I was not messing around for those meetings or for that testimony, because they'd be like, oh, look at Missy's pulling out her power again. And I was like, that's right. I'm pulling out the power, because I just was owning my own, it was sort of my way of kind of flipping the bird to the Utah State Legislature sometimes. But what ended up happening is that got me out of my head and into my body. And once I was into my body and I was wearing these fabulous clothes and I was feeling really confident, it made me feel assured that I could do this job, even though oftentimes I felt like a total imposter. So that was the first thing I did, was I really put on armor. The second thing that I did when I was working for Planned Parenthood is I surrounded myself with people who would give me really solid advice. So my CEO, Carrie Galloway, was and still is one of my most favorite mentors. She believed in me. Hi, Aaliyah. She believed in me explicitly. And she was a great boss to have. I surrounded myself by people at the legislature lobbyists and other elected officials who were really fantastic at giving me wonderful advice about how to navigate complicated, difficult conversations with people who didn't agree with me at all. I really focused on treating other people who who were working against what I was trying to do with respect and dignity, because I wanted them to treat me with respect and dignity. And so the second way I really overcame my imposter syndrome in those spaces was to surround myself by people who actually really wanted to see me succeed. So even if they didn't want my bill to succeed, they wanted me to feel like I was successful. And so there was a lot of moments when I worked for Planned Parenthood where people were really fantastic at helping support the work that I really wanted to do. I had a great staff. We had our moments, but I ended up with a staff that really believed in the mission of the organization and the agency, and that really was very useful, especially when times got really complicated and difficult. Sometimes my staff didn't agree with me, and that would make this imposter syndrome rear up inside of me. And it was ugly, and it would make me defensive and mean and ugly. And as I look back on that time now, one of the things that I've really come to realize is that I often let my imposter syndrome get the best of me and make me feel even more insecure about who I am and my abilities in those moments. And I think part of that is just growing through your 30s. But I also think part of that was really that I would let my head take over and not let my heart do the talking. And so if there's one bit of advice I would give you about really thinking about your imposter syndrome and how it's from here and not from here, is listen to where it's coming from. If it's coming from your heart, it's not your imposter syndrome. It's your passion and your joy and your excitement and your life for things. So anyway, to recap, the first thing I did was I created a really good suit of armor in really nice clothes that made me feel sexy and sassy and saucy and fantastic. The second thing, with really good shoes. The second thing I did was I really surrounded myself with people who were supportive and loving and kind and fantastic. And then the third thing that I did to really deal with my imposter syndrome at this point in my life. So we talked a little bit about my imposter syndrome in my 20s in the first part of this. And now we're kind of talking about how I dealt with my imposter syndrome early on in my 30s. And so the third thing that I did was I got to this point. Hey, Petal, how are you? I got to this point with myself where, and I've always been this way. I am a rebel. I have always been a rebel. I'm a very rebellious human being. So one of the things that happened at this time period when my imposter syndrome would rear up is every time someone told me it was going to be impossible to do what I wanted to do, I would just tap into that inner rebel, the rebellious woman in me, and basically be like, well, you're not going to tell me what to do. I'm just going to do this anyway. And so what happened was that my imposter syndrome would be like, they are all going to know that you are completely incapable of making this happen. You're never going to win for the women of Utah. You're a total loser, blah, blah, blah. And then I would be like, no, my rebel tells me that I can do anything I want to do. And that means I can flip the bird to all the people who don't believe in me. And I am going to take this platform that I have and this ability to communicate with people who may not necessarily agree with me, and I'm going to use that to my advantage. And I am going to make a difference in the state. And I am going to do things that make me feel excited. And that is the rebel. Hi, Dreama. That is the rebel in me who was like, I have had enough of listening to that imposter syndrome say, you're never going to do this. And what ended up happening, and the other thing that was really helpful in tapping into my inner rebel. Hi, Marianne. Hey, I just talked about you, Marianne, about how I had the greatest staff ever at Planned Parenthood. Yay, you were part of that. So good. So what I did was every time my imposter syndrome would say, there is no way in hell you are going to make this happen, I would think, okay, well, I'm just going to do it 10 times better. So I was able, with the support of my team that I just referred to earlier, I was able, because I had such supportive people around me, to kill abortion legislation that was just really bad for women and their families. And I was able to enact really incredible innovative legislation for women and their families. And if I would have listened to that voice in my head, my imposter syndrome say, you're too lesbian, you're too fat, you're too much, you're too loud, you are too not Mormon, you are too all the things. If I would have listened to all that and not just tapped into that rebel who was like, screw all the twos, we're going to make a difference, I would not have been able to make the change with my team that I made when I worked for Planned Parenthood. So for those of you that are joining a little bit late, I was talking earlier about how at this point, when I was the vice president of public policy for Planned Parenthood of Utah, the struggle that I went through, which by the way made me a very angry person back then, so I don't think I handled everything right, but part of that was just this screaming voice inside of me that told me I was incapable of doing the work that I was doing. And so the ways I didn't listen to that were, the first way was that I built up a really amazing suit of armor in my wardrobe and wore fabulous clothes and fabulous shoes and things that made me feel sexy and sassy and fabulous. And the second thing I did was surround myself with a team of human beings, whether they were my own staff or my board or the people I worked with or lobbyists and legislators at the Capitol who truly believed in the work that I was doing and believed in the work that that we would be able to do. And then the third thing was that I literally engaged the inner rebel in me and was like, fuck this. Like, people are going to keep telling me it's going to be impossible, and I'm going to keep showing them that it's not. Because as long as I persevere and as long as I keep working and as long as I keep pushing, that means that change is going to happen for women and their families in Utah. And if I don't do it, I'm not sure who else is going to. And so that was really the way that I pushed through this awful imposter syndrome that I had from the minute the CEO of Planned Parenthood called and tried to hire me. Yes, Dreama, great shoes are as important as a good team. It is so flipping true. And I can tell you, my shoes, let me just say, I had a Nordstrom shoe boy, and he would call me and be like, hey, I just want you to know I've pulled 20 pairs of shoes for you. I noticed the legislative session is getting sort of difficult, and so you should just come down and try them on. And I would leave the Capitol and go to Nordstrom and try on new shoes and buy like 5 pairs. And it was awesome. Part of a great team, by the way. I had all the teams. So I really hope that what you're seeing here and what you're getting out of these little talks about my own imposter syndrome, which by the way comes from here, not from here, is this idea and this notion that even though I have turned into Dr. Melissa Bird, PhD, I had to come from Missy Bird, nearly high school dropout who, threw up before she gave a speech in front of anybody. And now I have no problem standing up in front of a room of thousands of people. That's just, I don't have an issue with that. And so, but it comes from really learning how to tap into this heart space and not get up in my head so much about what I have to share with other people. And that has taken a lot of practice. And so when you're being physically and verbally attacked by the media and by lobbyists and by elected officials and by people in the community for your position, as I was, and other people who work for Planned Parenthood have experienced this a lot. Also, people who work for LGBT advocacy have experienced this a lot. When you are under that kind of pressure, you really learn how to figure out how to push past things that normally you wouldn't be able to push past. So getting through that imposter syndrome was really critical because it also made me a less angry person. And I remember the day sort of all of that broke wide open was the day that my ex-wife left on August 16th, 2010. And what happened in that moment with that heartbreak was that imposter syndrome that had been driving me and had been pushing me towards a more critical, angry space completely fell away, at least for a while. And this is some good foreshadowing for the third segment, which is all about getting my PhD and how I dealt with the imposter syndrome of getting my PhD. But in that moment that Lauren left and I was eviscerated on the floor, that imposter syndrome didn't have anywhere to latch onto anymore because I was just broken wide open. And that was where I really got to see how being in my heart space created an opportunity for me to connect with people in a different way than I was used to connecting with them before. So next week, on Friday, or maybe Monday. I don't think I have any special guests on Monday. So next week on Monday, I'm going to talk with, I'm looking at my schedule. Next week on Monday, I'm going to talk to you about how the imposter syndrome, again, reared its head in the period right before I got my PhD, when I became a mother for the first time, and while I was getting my PhD. So I hope that you will join me again for my Facebook Live. Thanks, Dreama. I'm glad you enjoyed this message. And that you will join me again on Monday at noon for Monday Mayhem. I am so excited to announce that I just booked 2 more Fanning the Flames workshops. One is in New York City and one is in Nevada City, California. So I've got Salt Lake City Fanning the Flames coming up on March 30th. I've got Novi, Michigan coming up on April 3rd. And then we got Fanning the Flames New York City in Brooklyn on April 14th. And then we've got Nevada City on the 18th. And then I'm trying to get one in Bellingham, Washington in the beginning of May. So I'm telling you, Fanning the Flames is going places. I'm so glad you loved it, Petal. I'm so glad that was helpful for you. So I will put a link in the comments about the What I Wore blog that I wrote about the clothes that I wore at the Utah State Legislature to kind of help me push through my imposter syndrome. And I think y'all are awesome. I did write a blog today. The blog today is all about how much louder I get when people tell me to be quiet. I hope y'all have a great weekend, and I will check me out, birdgirlindustries.com. Talk to you soon. Bye.